everyone, and welcome to another episode of Read and Write with Natasha. Today, I'm so happy to have with me author Jessica Speer. Jessica is the award winning author of BFF or NRF, which means not really friends. And it's a girl's guide to happy friendships. She has a master's degree in social sciences and explores social emotional topics in ways that connect with kids. She lives in Colorado with her husband and two daughters. Jessica, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Natasha. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, I'm so happy to have you. So I finished your book and it's fantastic. I really loved it. I I discussed this
Thank
with
you.
yeah, I discussed it with my daughter and it's funny. Today she was saying something and I told, I'm trying to use some of the tips. I was like, what you said really hurt my feelings. And she was like, "You've been reading that book, haven't you?"
I love that you read it too. That was my hope, is that the parent reads it too, because I do think it's a framework, so you guys can work together, guiding your daughter when these things come up. So yeah, I love it. Good, it's sinking in.
Of course. So, can you tell us, for anyone who's watching or listening, what this book is all about?
Sure. Well, it's grew out of a friendship program I ran for girls. I've got two daughters, and I noticed, when they were in elementary school, things got trickier. Friendships got a lot more complicated, which, as a social scientist, that got me so curious. So I started researching that, found lots of great stuff that helped me as a parent and kids. So I started a friendship program, and then out of that grew this book. I want to just kind of bring some of these just fundamental, basic, healthy relationship skills to an earlier age. I thought, how helpful. Let's just talk about these things. Let's shed some light on and talk about some of these really common but tricky scenarios, that especially girls in elementary start to come upon. So that's kind of the premise of the book. So it's just really, almost a guidebook filled with quizzes, because, it's got to be fun. I'm talking to 8, or 7 to 13-year-old. So it's got to be fun, really interactive, full of stories. A lot of the stories I heard over and over from kids in my program. So that's, it's called BFF or NRF, not really friends, because I thought that really encapsulates what's going on in that time frame.
Yeah, that's great. So, I'm curious, why did you target it only for girls? Is it, I don't want to be like very like focus on gender and be like use some sort of stereotypes, but do you think drama among friendship is more prevalent among preteen girls than preteen boys? Because I have twins. I have a boy and a girl. They're both 10. And the friendship drama is mostly with my daughter, not with my son. My son is like, oh, he's just too busy with his video games and whatever. And again, I don't want to like, use gender stereotypes, but do you feel like this is more prevalent among girls than boys?
And that's such a great question. In fact, I actually feel like I need to write another book. And the reason I wrote this for girls is what I found, that it was happening for girls earlier than boys. I think part of that is they start puberty earlier. So, girls tend to be 2 years ahead in that. So I feel like the reason we see a lot of this starting to crop up much more in elementary school for girls is because they're moving along that developmental path faster. So when I was running my program, which actually was open to boys too, I had a really hard time getting boys involved. So for me, I got a lot more expertise working with girls. However, one of the most common comments I've had, since the book has come out, is boys need this too. And I totally
Mm.
agree. So I have in my head, I'm not sure whether it's going to be a book for boys. I'm not sure whether it's going to be all genders. But the concepts in the book are really, they translate to everybody and even all ages. The stories are very much directed to girls. They're the stories I heard over and over. So I wanted to make it super relatable, but I don't think, boys get out on this scot-free. I think it happens a little later. And I think the dynamics of the friendship struggles are just a little different than how they play out with girls.
How different?
I think what I found from the boys is the girls, girls are so relational that, we immediately, if there's a problem, we're immediately starting to maybe deal with that either internally or externally. Boys, they might internalize that a lot more. Things might really build up, and then there might be more of a little explosion. Like they might just have a physical fight or something, will explode for a while. And then it tends to, possibly calibrate back. Where girls, it might fester. And, instead of maybe working directly through that, there might be some kind of on the sly way they're trying to work through things. So I just found different ways that they're working through these struggles. Different strategies as to how to resolve some of these relationship struggles.
Hmm. Do you think the pandemic played a role in kind of uh, expanding the drama, or making things more difficult? And I was talking with a therapist the other day, and about those issues with the kids, and one of the things that she mentioned was that she felt that the pandemic really affected the kids, especially girls, she said. And she said, like, even the concept of mean girls is amplified because of the pandemic. Do you agree with that assessment? What has
I
been your experience so
I
far?
totally agree that this has been profoundly challenging for kids. And what I found, we learn how to be relational by being in relationships. We learn social skills by practicing them, especially in a school setting. So, with kids pulled back from that, what I'm hearing over and over from teachers and school counselors is they're noticing kids are a little behind in this. Some kids are even 2 years behind in, social emotional development. So that's a huge shift, which of course ripples into their relationship. So yes, I 100% agree. I think what I'm hearing from teachers, there's a lot more acting out. Like we have so many pent up, emotions and things going on inside of us that kids might be acting out more. Their relationships are, maybe filled with more strife. And I think a lot of that has to do with kind of being pulled out of this situation, pulled out of practice, pulled out of kind of the natural transition of relationships. Friendships are always changing, but when we're, pulled out and isolated, we can't experience how those are changing. So that adds a whole new layer of, unknowns as to what's going on in our friendships.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Do you think, the pandemic was like a big experiment on kids in terms of, because many people, the scientists, everyone, we've never been through this before. And I feel like the kids kind of carried the burden of what really happened, and it really affected them emotionally. And I've seen it with my own kids. So I'm gonna go back to the concept of gender stereotypes, and I was wondering if what kind of feedback you got on this. Did anyone accuse you of, like, like emphasizing gender stereotypes? I noticed you, like, you're trying to be inclusive and so for anyone who identify as a girl as well. But what was kind of the feedback from both sides of the debate? We here at the podcast, we don't take any opinion. We're open. We're very inclusive. So I'm just curious to see if in that term of, like, gender stereotype came up in the feedback when you wrote that after you published the book.
Yeah, great question. And I haven't had any pushback yet, other than some parents who've come to events that say, I'd like a boys version. And but then we're again stereotyping gender. So I get
Yeah.
that. So this is kind of in my head. I'm going to talk to my publisher about this. I'm trying to think this through. Like, I feel like, the book is really relatable for girls. And that was my purpose. I wanted to make something that felt really real. The scenarios and the quotes they're hearing in the book are things that they've experienced themselves. So that was my purpose. You write what you know. So I was definitely writing what I know. And so, but now I'm like, okay, well now, years later, how could I write this in a way that doesn't even actually go into genders. In fact, I kind of did. I have a book coming out next summer about middle school where as much as possible, I just avoided any mention of who said this quote. It
Okay.
includes choose your own endings where, it's you are the protagonist in the story where you get to choose. It doesn't matter, what gender you are. So I've actually already kind of done that, I guess, on a different subject. So that book is called Middle School Safety Goggles Advise. Really similar. I love interactive stuff. I love, kids to, really see themselves in the book. But I took a different path there, but I'm still in my brain trying to figure out this one. Is there a way for me to write another version that's open to even more ages and more genders? And I haven't figured that out yet, but I know there's a way. I'm just thinking it through. I'm thinking that
Yeah.
through right now.
What was the reaction of the kids who read the book? What did they tell you? And yeah, I'm just curious to see what they thought of it.
What I'm hearing is, what the book does, because it's so interactive. The first chapter of the book is how healthy is my friendship, and the reason I put that as chapter 1 is because when I was working with kids, that was so helpful for them. What I found is in this age group, so we're talking 7 to 12 years old, just starting to really learn about relationships, learning what it means to be a good friend, how to be a good friend, that those quizzes were so helpful in helping them identify maybe what's not going right. So that's why I wanted to make this book super interactive. So the feedback I've heard is, that's helpful. Sometimes we find ourselves in situations where, this doesn't feel right and we don't know why. Then the second chapter is a second quiz is how are my friendship skills? Because I think we always have to look internally. Every relationships, takes two people. So it's this balance of looking outward, but also constantly looking inward. Like, what could I be doing differently in this relationship that might help? And for a lot of girls, I found it might be speaking up. It might be, communicating what they need or how they want to be treated. So the feedback I've heard is positive, but mostly because it's written in just a fun, light way. It's super interactive, super engaging, allows a lot of self-reflection, and for girls to work through it, at their own pace, however they want to, with whatever they're hoping to get out of the book.
Yeah. And I noticed that actually some of the advice, the majority of the advice also applies to adults, honestly.
Totally.
Like, for example, the 9 friendship truths, I found that like most of them are, apply to anyone, not only kids. We all navigate friendship, and all of our lives, and we make friends in our 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So I personally benefited from it as a 45-year-old woman. So did you get a reaction from adults as well about especially the friendship pyramid? I found that very fascinating. Was that your own invention, or that was like based on other theories that were created?
It's something I wrote, but I later found that somebody else has something that's more concentric circles. But as I was researching this whole phenomena of friendship, I realized, that there are some truths that are really helpful to know, that our friendships do change over time, and, close friends are hard to find. So these are some of the truths that grew into the framework for the program I ran. And you're
Yeah.
right, they're foundational, and, they're all for all of us, for all ages, for all genders. So that's why I am thinking in my head, I'm like, I know this information is really useful to others, so I have heard, especially from, the parents that have read the book with their kids, are like, yeah, there's things in here I need to work on too. And, as I
Yeah.
was writing it, I knew that too. Like when I do the quiz, how are my friendship skills? I know exactly, where my weak spots are and where I have room to grow. So yeah, you're right. It is, it applies to everything. My thought for, why did I write this book for this group, is, again, I got the chance to really test it out with girls, because they
Yeah.
were the ones that were showing up in my program over and over. And so I got a chance to really work through. And I thought, how cool if at a younger age, we can introduce these things, because where things get really interesting is middle school. So
Yeah.
middle school is kind of the height of a lot of transitions in relationships. So I wanted to front load that and share some of these things so that when kids get to middle school, they have some foundation to grow from.
Yeah, I'm really not looking forward to middle school and all the drama that I'm gonna be dealing with. Um, so in terms of your publishing journey, how did you publish the book? Did you find the publisher? Did they come to you? Did you have to look for an agent? Part of this podcast is we inspire and give tips to aspiring authors. So I'm just curious to hear about how this book came to life. So, just tell us a bit about your publishing journey.
Sure. And, it was a long journey, as I'm sure, a lot of the other writers you talk, it's a very long journey. So patience and persistence is key. I started writing for kids about 10 years ago. But I started writing more just fiction. Always, I love social emotional topics. That's kind of my passion. So it was in a more fiction setting. And so I started playing with that, and I joined the Society of Children's Writers, which is an amazing international organization. And through that organization, I really learned more about the craft and the path to publishing. So, there's always, you can self-publish or you can traditionally publish. And my hope was to get traditionally published, because I just, the weight of selling the books myself sounded really scary. Like that I had to be responsible for selling my books, in a more self-publishing arena. I didn't want to do that. So, after I wrote some fiction for a few years, I got on this tangent where I was really researching, exploring friendships, for a few years and writing this program. And then I thought, well, gosh, this makes sense to have this as a book. So I wrote that as a book. And it's funny how these things come to you later. Like I read nonfiction all the time. I just devour nonfiction. So, you write what you know, of course,
Okay.
I didn't start there, but I ended up writing what I know. I wrote a proposal. And again, learned how to do all this, how to write a book proposal through, critique groups and the Society of Children's Book Writers. And I had heard, somebody told me once that if you are writing nonfiction, you don't necessarily need an agent. And I'd heard how hard it was to get an agent. So I was like,
Yeah.
okay, good. I'm just going to skip that step. I'm going to write a really good book proposal, and I am going to submit it to houses that are open for publishers. And this was back in 2018, so before the pandemic. And the Society of Children's Writers, when you're a member, you have access to, they call it the book. And the book lists all children's publishing houses, and it often will state whether they're open or they're not open. But it also talks about what their focus is, like what kind of books are they really interested in. So I went through that like page by page, and I marked every single publisher that I thought might be interested in this book. And then I reached out to them. And I did that a lot. I mean, I kind of lost track. I think
Okay.
I want to say I got to 75
Okay. Yeah.
submissions. I just kept, some of them want, email submissions. Some of them want you to mail it. And so I just kind of kept submitting it and submitting it and submitting it. And one day I got an email. I almost fell off my chair. So I got an email where someone was like, we want to talk to you about this book. And so they, and the next thing I know, a month later, it's under contract. So it started from there. And then I didn't even know what to do. I was just so amazed. And I went to another SCBWI, Society of Children's Writers Conference, and Lori Hulse Anderson was the keynote, and she's amazing. And I just pulled her aside and I told her this. I'm like, what do I do next? And she said her best advice was, you have to write your next one. I was like, oh, you're right. I have to write the next one. So it was great. I immediately, after that conversation, dove into writing another, and, wrote up a proposal, sent it first to the publisher who took my first book, and they took that one too. And that one comes
Oh,
out
wow.
this summer. And I did it again. I'm like, well, I better write another one. So I wrote another one, and they bought that too. So I have a book coming out for the next 2 summers, which is amazing. Yeah. So for those listening out there, just keep doing it. Just keep writing, just keep submitting, just stick with it. It took me, gosh, almost 10 years of
Oh,
just
wow.
doing it. Yeah. But that's not an uncommon story. You just keep writing, keep submitting, keep writing, submitting, and everyone's journey is a little different.
How did you handle rejections?
They're never fun, but you just get used to it. You totally get used to it. You get a ton of, the form letter rejections, which, occasionally you get a rejection that actually someone might write something on that's helpful. And those are awesome, but mostly they're just the form letter rejections. And, you just can't take it personally. Of course, it's really hard not to, but these publishing houses have, they might have a book that's already similar to yours. It might not at all be the type of stuff they publish. So it's really important for writers just to remember, don't take that personally. It's just not a good fit, so just charge forward, keep doing it.
Yeah. So part of being an author is dealing with feedback, whether it's positive or negative. And I'm curious if you got any negative feedback and how did it affect you emotionally and how did you deal with it? Because that's another thing that we discuss here is how to deal with feedback as an author.
Yeah, it is hard, and sometimes you have to figure out if it makes sense for you and your project. And I've started doing things really differently because it just felt right. And so I know what I'm doing is not the norm. I'm
Mm,
writing really interactive books. And I'm breaking all sorts of rules. So I had to think clearly about whether I should listen to that and go forward or not. And so had I listened to some of my earliest feedback, like some of my books are really different, so because they don't fit the mold, I had to believe in the concept myself. So
okay.
if you have any authors out there that are doing something um, that's not everybody else is doing, it doesn't mean it's wrong. You really got to listen to your gut there. But for me, what has always been so helpful is a book proposal. And this is, again, more of a nonfiction thing. But when you write a book proposal, it really solidifies what you're trying to accomplish. And you look into the competing titles and you really get into the nitty gritty of what you're trying to accomplish with this book. And for me, doing that at the very front end really helps clarify where I am, what I am doing, what direction am I heading? What am I hoping to accomplish with this book?
Hmm. What about marketing the book during the pandemic? How were you able to do like a book tour and go to bookstores, or was it mostly Zoom? This was published, like
21, yeah, August
August 20.
2021.
Okay,
Yeah.
so basically less than a year. So it was like published in the midst of the pandemic. So how was your experience trying to market your book in the midst of pandemic? Are people reading more during the pandemic, or like I'm just curious to see how publishing a book during the pandemic and marketing, how was that experience?
And the book was originally supposed to come out in 2020. And it
Okay.
got pushed. And so that was hard, because you're waiting so long, and I got pushed a year. But it actually worked out okay because it gave me more time to prepare for the release. And one thing that was super helpful for me is I got involved in a group of debut other middle grade authors. There
Okay.
were like 70 of us. And so we were all debuting in 2021, and we could all really help each other out, with
Okay.
just sharing social posts with reviews, just helping with announcements. So that ended up being really beneficial. For the topic of my book, it was really lucky because a lot of kids were not in a good place as far as
Mm,
their social emotional worlds go. So for me, it actually worked out okay. The timing was just fine. I didn't do a lot of in-person things. I did a lot of more podcasts and things like that, but that was fine too. That given the circumstances, for me, it was okay, having this book come out just towards the middle to the end of this pandemic was great timing after all.
hmm. What was the hardest part of the publishing journey? for you?
The hardest part, I think, was just it's really hard to keep going. After so many years and so many rejections, it's hard to not throw in the towel. So I think that's the hardest part, is just to keep doing it, keep submitting, keep submitting is the hardest part. Yeah, for me. But once you get past that, I feel like once you get your first book out there, it really opens a lot more doors for you.
Yeah, yeah. When is your next book coming out?
This August, so August 2022, it's called Middle School Safety Goggles Advised.
What is it about?
Well, this book, and so as you go, you also learn your process. So I guess I'm learning my process. So what I wanted to do, I've always had this idea in my head: middle school is tricky, and
Yeah.
people, sometimes they're 50 years old and they look back and that was maybe one of the most challenging parts of their lives. So I'm like, I want to know about that. Like, what is going on there? Why is that so tricky? So I went into middle school classrooms, seventh grade, because seventh grade seems to be the peak of trickiness. And I just asked students, I asked hundreds of them, like, so what is the hardest part about middle school?
Hmm.
And, classroom after classroom, student after student told me. So I came up with the top 10 of the hardest things about middle school. And I just dove into them. But I thought, how can I dive into these things in a way that's fun? So just like my first book, of course, every chapter starts with a quiz.
Mm.
And every chapter has a choose your own ending, which we talked about earlier. I tried to make those just gender neutral. And my publisher found an awesome illustrator for this, because I also wanted those illustrations to be as gender neutral as possible. So
Yeah.
the illustrator did an amazing job of that. So yeah, just it gets into harsh judgment and gossip and crushes and dating and social
Mm.
media. So it's a lot of the tough stuff. But what I found, just working with kids, is they want to talk about it. There's some relief to let's just get it out there and talk about this tough subject. In a way that's really relatable. So in the second book, I tried to throw in a lot of humor and a little science that back some of the reasoning behind human behaviors, just to help shed some light on that. So yeah, so that comes out this summer. I'm super excited. It's called Middle School Safety Goggles Advised.
Oh, looking forward to reading it. Uh, I will also share it with my kids as well, since they start middle school in a couple of years.
Good.
So, okay, so writing routine. There are like two different types of writers. Those who like very disciplined, like write rain or shine. Others, just write here and there. And what is your style? What is your like writing routine style?
I'm pretty disciplined, but I found I have to do it really project based, so
Okay.
I don't have like a certain time I write every day, but I
Okay.
will, so say for instance, my second book, I gave myself the time frame of how I'm going to have this, the first draft of this done here, which is often, by the end of the school year, because I work from home. And as soon as my kids are home, all bets are off as far as how my schedule works anymore. So so I
Tell
try
me
to,
about it.
so try during the school year to be as productive as possible. So yeah, I give myself clear deadlines with wiggle room in there, knowing that I made that book. I actually managed to crank out a chapter a week. I don't know how I did it. My third book, I couldn't even get there. Like I just, so I give myself these deadlines to try to stay on track, but knowing, sometimes I have to figure out ways to do that, so I'm pretty flexible with myself, but deadlines and knowing when I'm not going to get stuff done is really helpful too. So for me, summers are really hard. So I have to do something different that doesn't include so much headspace over the summers, like marketing.
So are you an author full time now?
I am now. So pre-pandemic, I was teaching at our local college. I was doing that, and I was writing as well. But now it's gotten to the point where I have so much to do that I had to let go of the teaching, which is amazing. I mean, I love that too, but amazing that I'm just doing this full time now, which is incredible. Yeah, so I'm feeling so lucky and grateful.
How does it feel in terms of Like I do writing full time, in addition to other projects like the podcast, and sometimes, and I read that among other writers, they feel sort of a stigma of saying you're a writer, like if you're at a dinner party, you're sipping on wine and eating shrimp, and someone, oh, so what do you do? And like, I'm a writer. Do you feel there's a stigma about, that's not serious or whatever? Because I feel it sometimes. Do you ever encounter the stigma or no?
Yeah, I feel like when you tell people, they don't really know what that means. So,
Yeah, yeah.
I'll say I write kids books. That's why that's what I say now. I write kids books. And then of course
Okay.
it just launches into what am I writing or what did I write. So yeah, it does feel a little weird and nebulous, but that's
Yeah.
okay. It is weird and it is nebulous.
Yeah, we like have to work hard on, like, deconstructing or this stigma around like writing full time, especially now with the great resignation where like everyone they're doing their own thing. So let's start a petition.
Yes.
So I want to go back to the concept of friendship, and I'm not sure if I missed this, but was there a part about the friendship is ending for good? This is it. And how do you deal with it emotionally, and how it's gonna affect you?
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
did I miss that, or did,
Well,
did you intentionally
and
not
what
add it?
the one thing I did include is how to manage big emotions in healthy ways, because I think
Yeah,
that's a really important skill, especially for kids coming out of the pandemic. How do we navigate these big emotions? But as far as ending friendships, and this is such a great question because this happens, and what the way I address that is more in the friendship pyramid. So in the friendship pyramid, there's very close friends at the tippy top. And
yeah,
we tend to have just a couple of those, and they're hard to find. And I found working with girls, they have phases where they don't have that, and that could feel really unsettling. So they might not feel at a certain point in their lives that they have a close friend. And I've just seen girls move through that, and that feels a little stressful. And then underneath that, there's friends, and this is a big bucket. These are our neighbors, these are our teammates. So I keep that really loosely termed. And then underneath that is acquaintances. But running up and down the side of the pyramid is change. And so what I see happening, and the reason I didn't get real definitive about ending girls'
yeah,
friendships is because a girl can have a close friend, there could be some sort of falling out or some sort of change, that could go back to an acquaintance, and that happens a lot, and it's uncomfortable. I mean, how uncomfortable is it that we have this person that we're real close with, and now we're hardly walking, we're not saying hi to them as we walk by them in the hall.
yeah.
It's so awkward. But here's what I found, and the reason I don't advocate like for harsh endings is because as they grow, and now that I've got two kids in high school, I've seen this, and they're often still in the same school. There's the possibility for changed relationships there. So it might go friend, acquaintance, back to teammate, or friend, acquaintance, back to, who knows what. So there's been studies done on this. And
Okay.
so they've studied whether, it's better to like do a real like clear ending to this relationship or let it phase away. And the relationships that we allow to just phase away open the door to things in the future we didn't even consider. So for these very young girls, 7 to 11, occasionally you might be in a situation that is so extreme that you have to just end it. You have to have a really a conversation that clearly ends it. But that's hard for them to manage, I found. So the another thing to do is to, gracefully back out of that, and you could say something, hey, I need to take a little break, or hey, or just some no thank yous, I'm going to do something else. So starting to gracefully back away. And then, when they get to the next school year and they're sat next to each other in science class, it doesn't feel so challenging. I've seen this play out both ways. So does that answer your question? It's a complicated thing to navigate for adults
Yeah,
too.
yeah. Which actually, do you think adults are more likely to end friendships than kids? Like kids maybe are more understanding, while adults like, you're either with me or against me, especially now with this kind of charged political atmosphere. I've even seen it on places like Facebook. Like, if you endorse this candidate, I'm gonna unfollow you on Facebook. Like, people would put
Yes.
this. And do you think adults are more likely to end friendship while kids, are still kids and more understanding than adults? I'm just, and that's why the concept of ending friendship is more prevalent among
Yeah.
adults.
And maybe right now, I'd love to see a study on this. So prior to the pandemic, the majority of friendships phase away. And so that's one of the friendship truths. One of the friendship truths is friendships have different phases and change over time, because on average in our adult life, we have new friends every 7 years, and they
Every
fade.
7 years?
Yeah, every
Oh,
7 years. So,
huh.
most friendships in the adult life don't last beyond 7 years. So change is the norm. So that's what I wanted to bring in my book. Change is the norm. Um, but I love your point. Now that I feel like we're living in a world with a lot less civility. So now
Yeah.
that we're living in a world with a lot less civility, are we, coming out and just letting people have it in a way that we might not have in the past? I don't know. That wasn't the norm before the pandemic. The norm before the pandemic was to let things fade away when their time, was over, which, like I said, none of this feels comfortable. It's not comfortable to put a dead end to a relationship, and it's not comfortable to know that you need to casually, gracefully back out. None of those are comfortable, but it's also normal. So that's what I want to do. I want to normalize that we are always changing and growing. Our interests are changing, kids' personalities are changing. So they're looking for different things in friendship. And, part of the reason why this book resonates at this age with girls is because they're in this developmental phase where, as younger kids, their relationships are based more on play. So in early elementary, it's proximity and play. We're with this person because we really want to play with them. And then there's this shift that happens with every kid at, a different stage, where it's not really about play. It's more about shared interests and acceptance. Okay,
Yeah.
so then, of course, that's going to cause a big ruffle in all these relationships, right? Because we actually, we're not into that game anymore. What we really want is somebody who loves this video game as much as we do. Or, so there's these really natural progressions that happen throughout child development that changes relationships. It's not, doesn't make it easy, as
No.
you're going through it, because often one person in the friendship is ready for the change before the other one. But when I work with kids, what I always try to do is just encourage them to navigate these things, treating the other person with as much dignity as possible. If we
Yeah.
can realize these are two humans that are both worthy, of just respect and dignity. So how might we change the situation, treating them in that way? And I find, looking back, when we do that, when there's a situation that needs a shift, when we look back and we've handled that, treating that person with dignity, we feel better about ourselves too.
So you're saying we change friends every 7 years. What about the concept of like a childhood friend? Like
Yes.
I still have friends from childhood, and we've been friends like for over 30 years. And one of them just called me yesterday, for example, and I've known her since I was 7. Um, so does that mean that the concept of childhood friend is fading, or where do we stand when it comes to that?
No, and I think everybody's going to have, in the course of our lives, there's going to be people you meet that you have this really special connection with.
Yeah.
And there's usually not that many of them. For most people, studies show we might have 5. Like 5 is a lot. So there might be 5 people in your life that you have this really, close connection with, that even if you're living in different parts of the world, that connection is still there, and you can get back together and experience that. So that's that very tip of that friendship pyramid, those friends,
Okay.
those really close friends that are hard to find. But underneath that, the big bucket of friends where, we're calling them friends, we hang out sometimes, we're actually, we like them, but we might not be that close. They don't get us as much as our close friends do. We might not share as much about ourselves as we do with these close friends that we've got a special history with. So yes, that's that bucket, those, the friend bucket is where we're seeing a lot more transitions, especially given whatever phase we are in life. We might have, in college, we might have a lot of, different friends, that bucket. Some of them we might stay in touch with. Some of them, once we move out of college, we might, not, be in touch with them like we were in the past. So yeah, does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this has all been fascinating, and as I said, it makes me think about my friendship and how I handle them and how I should handle my friendship in the future as well. So before we conclude, do you have any tips for, let's say, for parents handling kids who are going through difficult friendship phases? What would be, like, your number one tip, or like few top tips you have?
So for parents, I think what's really hard to see is we all have some early wounds in this area. So if we see our son or daughter, going through something that, feels really familiar to us, it can trigger some really big emotions in us. So I think the first thing is to, when we see our kids going through something, really ground ourselves and kind of watch our own reaction to that, because that's ours. They're having their own experience, which may or may not be like whatever we experience. So really ground ourselves, watch our own emotional reactivity. What I did, especially when my kids are having a particularly hard time, is I have to just like physically ground myself and try to almost park whatever's going on inside of me, park that to the side so I can really be there for them. The last thing preteens and teens need is for us to go on our own emotional roller coaster by something they shared with us. And what I found is they start to pull away then. So if they
Yeah.
share with us and they see us get triggered and have a big reaction, that's something else they have to worry about. So they don't want to do that. They'll stop sharing with us if they see our huge reaction. So what I try to do is just be their sounding board, be their emotional coach, help them learn to navigate these big emotions, validate them. If they're feeling left out, if they're feeling rejected, just acknowledge how hard those emotions are, and help them find ways to navigate those emotions. So that's step one. And then two is, in the perfect world, we're guiding them to learn to gain the confidence to navigate these things. So a lot of times they don't need to do anything. So they want to just vent, they want to get it off their chest, but there's really nothing for them to do. They just need to do the best they can. And by sharing, they let that load out. They feel better. They feel relieved just by sharing that. But sometimes there might be they might need to do something. They might need to say something. So in those situations, what I encourage kids to do is, let's just first name all your options. Let's just get them out there. Okay, so this happened. You can do, let them come up with they're brainstorming. They can do option A, they can do option B, they can do option C. So that gets them into some problem solving. Let's think through these ideas. Let them come up with the ideas. Let them think through, even role play, how might those play out? And then let them choose. So that process is helping them develop the confidence in themselves to know that they can do this. When I would overstep and start to maybe suggest things that, are totally unrealistic, because I never know the whole story. I'm taking away the chance for my kids to do that on their own. So yeah, those are my two big suggestions to help kids, learn to navigate this, because it doesn't stop at childhood. Throughout our lives, relationships are tricky. So it's once we learn how to navigate them emotionally, how to navigate them, from a problem-solving method, we're in a much better place.
That's true. So this has been really wonderful. And any final thoughts to our listeners and viewers Before we conclude, anything you want to say about the writing journey, the parenting journey? Where can people get your book? Amazon? Is it where else?
It's anywhere. It's on Target, it's on Barnes and Noble, Amazon, the local bookstore. I always love to support the local bookstore. So if they don't have it, I'm sure they would get it for you. So yes, should be available anywhere you buy books. And last thoughts are, I think go easy on yourselves. For all you writers out there, go easy on yourselves. For your parents, go easy on yourself. We are all doing the best we can, aren't we? That's what
That's true.
Too.
That's
For
true.
kids in friendship, we are all doing the best we can with the skills we've got. So go easy on yourself, and keep doing it. Keep doing exactly what you're doing.
Thank you. This has been great. And again, everyone who's listening or watching, this is a great book, especially if you have preteen kids. Has fun read, has lots of golden nuggets for kids and adults alike. Thank you very much, Jessica, for being with us. I really enjoyed our chat, and best of luck with your next books. Can't wait to read them.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.